My name's Jackie Thomas. I'm the Engagement Manager for the London Sight Loss Councils. We are joined by the TfL, the e-scooter operators and the Metropolitan Police. Haran, who's to my left, is going to be chairing the session today.
I'm one of the members of the London Sight Loss Council, and I'm really pleased to invite you all here in this room today and virtually to our VI forum on the London electric scooter trial. Just for those of you who may be unfamiliar with the sight loss councils, there are councils across the country being established in partnership with TPT, and as sight loss councils, we seek to campaign and advocate on the behalf of the blind and partially sighted in our communities. We have three sort of key sort of areas: health and well-being, education and employment, and inclusive communities. So I suppose this subject today, electric scooters, sort of falls into that latter sort of inclusive communities. And in sort of advancing the sort of key messages and things that we're trying to change, we always seek to work in partnership with the key stakeholders and decision makers. So we're really pleased today that TfL and the scooter operators and the Metropolitan Police have agreed to come along, and we hope you'll find this very informative and an opportunity to learn more about scooters. Just wanted to say, just to provide some brief context to the trial and what we're doing on the Sight Loss Council. As many of you will be aware, electric scooters are a sort of, a form of transport that's, rapidly gaining popularity. Clearly, it's sort of part of that sort of decarbonisation pathway and, part of that sort of transport future. Although, understandably, there are sort of potential sort of safety risks around electric scooters, particularly for the blind and partially sighted. As you can imagine, the lack of sound and the speed and the sort of weight of some of these scooters can pose a risk. But, we recognise they do have a role to play. So what we're ultimately seeking to do is, achieve sort of effective regulation going forwards while allowing people to, benefit from them. So in London, which our guests will go on to talk about, the trial started last year in July. We, as the London Sight Loss Council, wrote to TfL and the operators, setting out some of our sort of potential concerns as the trial unfolded. We were really pleased that they came to one of our meetings last year, and we had very good engagement with them. And they took away a few points to think about. So we're really pleased that they've come back today to sort of report on progress on the trial. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Elizabeth. Yeah.
Hello. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? So nice to meet you all. I'm Lizzie. I work at TfL. I'm the stakeholder and contracts manager for the e-scooter trial. And I'm here with you today with the three operators, representatives from the three operators, and also representative from the Metropolitan Police. So we'll be doing a bit of a tag team. Thank you very much for inviting us here today. The purpose of the session is to provide you with some updates on the trial, a bit about how it works and the operations, but it would also be really great to get any feedback or suggestions or experiences from yourselves, because it is a trial and we're looking for any ways which we can improve it. So I'll just start a bit with some background to the trial. So just for those of you, in case you weren't aware, in terms of how we got to a place where we were running one in London. And so if you think back to July 2020, that's when the Department for Transport legalised trials in the UK. So across the UK, local authorities were making decisions around whether to run trials in their local areas. In London, we decided to run a pan-London trial to make sure that we could consistently deliver high standards across all the boroughs and to avoid a fragmented approach which could compromise safety. So over a period of a few, TfL went about working really closely with London councils, London boroughs, Metropolitan Police, other stakeholders, so disability stakeholders and other stakeholder groups, to come up with a set of standards that we wanted to make sure the trial was run at. We put those standards out to tender, and then in April last year, we selected 3 operators who are with us today, so Dot, Lime and Tier, to operate the trial. Then on the 7th of June last year, the trial launched. So it's been running for over 10 months now. And in terms of the way it works in terms of the trial area, so at the moment, there's 10 boroughs who are participating in the trial. And boroughs can choose whether or not they want to take part. So it's an individual borough decision as to whether they want to join. Those who aren't taking part are what we call geo-fenced out. So that means the operators' technologies ensure that they can't be ridden in those boroughs. So it only operates in the 10 boroughs that are taking part. The boroughs themselves do also set their own geofencing zones. So they can choose if there's particular areas they don't want the e-scooters to go, or to go slower. And this is usually based around if they think there's a sort of safety benefit. I guess, for example, if there's high pedestrian areas in their borough, they might put a no-go zone in that area. In terms of some of the latest updates, every 4 weeks we publish some of the headline metrics on our website. So I'm happy to share that link around afterwards if people want to keep updated and some of the key statistics. At the moment, there's over 3,885 vehicles currently in operation in the trial, and that's across the 3 operators. And there's been over 740,000 trips made to date, so over the first 40 weeks. Out of those 740,000 trips, we've reported 15 serious injuries, and there's been 0 fatalities. We found that the average ride duration is about 2.6 kilometers distance with a duration of about 19 minutes. So yeah, there's some of the key headlines and data that we've got from the trial. I'm now going to pass on to the operators who are just going to give you an overview about some of the safety features and how it all works. And then I'll come back to summarize about next steps. I think Duncan's up there.
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Lizzie. My name's Duncan Robertson. I'm the General Manager for DOT in the UK and Ireland. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about some of the features of the vehicles themselves. And I will start with the fact that, yes, these vehicles are exceptionally robust. They are designed and built for being out in a kind of urban environment and for sharing and for heavy usage. Some of the key features that they have, I mean, these are kind of features that they all have to have a lot of the time. But, you know, for example, front and rear braking systems, including engine braking, to make sure that the vehicles can be slowed very quickly if they need to be. Each vehicle, and this, excuse me, this goes across all operators as well, all have very clear, unique ID numbers so that you can report a scooter and we can find out exactly what was going on. So if there's an issue with it, we can either move it if it's problematic, or if someone was behaving inappropriately on that scooter, we can suspend their account or remove them from the system entirely. All the vehicles have phone numbers on them for people to contact us 24 hours a day as well. All vehicles have lights on the front and the rear and reflectors as well for extra visibility for the riders in particular. All also have manual bells. So, bless you. so that the rider can alert people if they need to. All vehicles that are taking part in the trial have very, very large wheels to help make sure that they can deal with the kind of London environment and the road environment, and keep the riders safe in particular as well. All have double kickstands to make sure that the vehicles are standing up as much as possible and keep that stability when they're standing still. A key decision that was made when the trial was started in collaboration with the Metropolitan Police, and Steve, who's talking later, may well speak about this as well, is the fact that we reduced the speed of the maximum speed of the vehicles to 12.5 miles per hour. The legal maximum for the UK is 15.5 miles an hour, but we decided that having a slightly slower speed would be beneficial. And then, as Lizzie mentioned, there's also no-go zones and slow zones where we reduce the speed even further. I'll just talk about the onboarding process a little bit. Everyone has to download an app to be able to access the scooters. In doing so, you need to upload a valid driving license, which gets validated and checked. It's only available to people that are over the age of 18. And each operator has a mandatory training session, and we will also have additional training sessions that include disability to try and encourage people to understand, how to use the vehicles and the fact that, that there's other people that are using the roads as well. From an environmental perspective, I think it's useful to point out that all of our operations are done with electric vans and cargo bikes. So we maintain all our vehicles and collect them and change the batteries using these types of vehicles as well. So yeah, in summary, the vehicles are very, very robust with numerous safety features, and we'll talk about more of those in due course as well. I'm going to hand over now to Hal, who's going to talk to you about a number of things, including the maintenance of our vehicles, which is obviously critical to making sure that they're available and in good order and safe for everyone. So over to Hal.
Thank you, Duncan. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Hal Stevenson. I'm Senior Public Affairs Manager for the UK and Ireland. I'll mostly be focusing on our operations in terms of maintenance and also our incident response and reporting procedures. Before I go on to provide a more detailed overview of that, just wanted to thank you all again for the continued constructive engagement on this trial, and thanks for having us here today to continue that. It's a really helpful forum for us, and hopefully you feel the same in terms of some of the recommendations and the progress that's being made from these sessions. So maintenance, you can't run a successful micromobility service like Lime, Tier and .do without making sure safety is at the heart of it. People don't want to ride vehicles they don't think are safe. People, and more importantly, cities as well, will not provide licenses to operators that do not have safety as a track record. So as well as it obviously being imperative and the right thing to do, it is also a clear commercial concern for any operator in the space. So, and I'm speaking on behalf of all three operators, safety is absolutely the critical factor when we're launching and running a service such as the e-scooter trial in London. And the way we can deliver that from an on-street perspective is regular proactive maintenance checks. So every time one of our on-street or team members or rangers, as Tier will call, I'm sure, every time we go out and check vehicles on street, whether that's because a user has reported an issue, whether that's because there's a low battery that needs swapping, whether that's because there's too many scooters in one location that need to be moved to another. Whenever we come into contact with a vehicle, we are all doing the same standardized 7 or 6 point checks on these vehicles, checking key things like tires, braking, making sure those high touch surfaces are also sanitized as well. That's another critical part of maintenance. People don't want to rent vehicles they don't think look clean. That was something that was important pre-COVID and hopefully now post-COVID, but during COVID definitely as well was obviously critical. But we don't just focus it on street. There's a huge amount of maintenance that obviously goes on at our warehouses. before a vehicle is deployed, it will undergo rigorous quality control and safety checking. DOT and TIR yet to invite me into their warehouses for reasons unbeknown to me. But we have a sort of test track, so to speak, where any vehicle before it's deployed will be tested on our site. I'm sure they have very similar quality control processes. And all of that maintenance and all of that repair work is logged on the back end of our system as well. So we can, and again, this is cross operator, we can proactively look at if things are breaking, why they're breaking, what data do we have on it, and what do we need to do to fix it. And that way we can deliver continuous iterative improvement and make sure the end result, which is what you guys really care about, is that the vehicles that we have on street are safe for use by riders, but critically as well, and making sure that they're safe for non-users too. And I know there's been some recent coverage around tyre issues, just specifically on that point, because that is part, obviously, of the maintenance checks as I outlined. From initial investigations there, a lot of the issues we're seeing or have been reported to us are related to vandalism by non-users. So it's not an underlying factor in terms of it being an issue with hardware or a certain mechanical fix that is required. It is, from our initial investigations, a result of vandalism, which is, to an extent, always a risk when you're operating a 24/7 service in a big city like London. We have clear measures in place to prevent it. And crucially as well, when a vehicle has been found to have an issue like that, it is immediately made unavailable for hire, which means even if something might not look safe on street, the rider or the e-scooter user is unable to ride it. So it may look unsafe, but it's not actually operational. And it will be collected and retrieved for safety checking and repair within 1 hour in most cases, which brings me to my next point, which is around SLAs. So as Lizzie was saying earlier on, TfL have worked with the boroughs and with third-party groups to design a really effective set of rules and regulations that we as providers had to sign up and say, you know, in return for being able to deliver this, we commit to achieving these and regularly reporting on them. One of the most stringent of those commitments is around the requirements for vehicle removals. That's both for vehicles that have been reported as having issues, but also vehicles that have been left in obstructive or dangerous locations. So for that, all operators have to retrieve those vehicles within 1 hour of notification. It doesn't matter where it is in the London trial area. That's obviously a very big area. It's the UK's largest e-scooter trial area, which means we've all cross-operator again had to invest in our on-the-ground operations teams. We've got to make sure we've got teams that are able to go and retrieve scooters in that time period, which means that we've all got very sizable teams in London. And again, that feeds back into how we have the capacity and the ability to deliver that day-to-day maintenance on street. We also have SLAs, so service level agreements, commitments to TfL around incident management processes. So we're required both by TfL, but also DFT to report any serious or slight injuries that have been sustained on the scooters. Again, these are really stringent requirements. If there's been a serious incident on one of our e-scooters, we have from 10 minutes when we find out about it to notify TfL. And in the small number of incidents we've had, I think Lizzie talked about 750,000 rides and 15 reported serious incidents. In those small number of incidents, all operators have been able to fulfill that and make sure that we're doing everything we can, working collaboratively to accurately report and respond effectively to those incidents. And that reporting process also gives us maximum transparency and the ability to make sure that we're learning cross-operator and through our partnership with TfL and the boroughs to make sure that lessons are learned in the event of incidents. So prior to being in this meeting, I was actually very kindly, TPT lent me use of one of their rooms for a call, which is the SHE Safety Board, which is basically an opportunity for the three operators to present on incident data to TfL and the participating and non-participating boroughs. And that's been a really effective forum for us in terms of learning from any incidents that have been reported and making sure that safety is always at the forefront of the trial. Something that's also a focus for us, and this is the last point I'll make before handing over to Alex, I think. And something else that's really been a focus for us is pavement riding. We know this is a big concern. The amount of time and money and investment that all three of us as providers have put into building vehicles that are built for road use, is clear. We don't want our scooters to be ridden on the pavement. They're not for pavements. They're for being ridden on roads, whether it's 12-inch wheels, for instance, that provide riders with the confidence to know they can use them on roads. But we absolutely don't want them being used on pavements. They're not toys. They are currently regulated as motor vehicles. They need to be used as such. So at the moment, the systems we have in place to do that are largely retrospective. So it's challenging for us to be able to stop someone riding on the pavement in real time, because that requires a level of certainty that means you're able to intervene. So for instance, if you want to stop a vehicle that you believe is on the pavement, you have to have such a high level of certainty because of the unintended safety consequences if they weren't to be on the pavement. And that's particularly challenging because obviously pavement space tends directly alongside road space. So the level of certainty required for live intervention is challenging. We are working on it, looking at things like computer vision or cameras on vehicles. Currently, the most effective measures we have in place around pavement riding, we can retrospectively look at rides. Lime, for instance, uses a system that can monitor vibrations. So it's a different road surface, obviously, between the road and a footway, and also responding to reports. So whenever we receive a report of pavement riding, even if it's just the time and location of that report, we're able to take action against the user involved. In most cases, unless it's been a serious infringement, for instance, a near-miss collision, we'd offer one single warning, and then if they did it again, they'd be immediately banned, and that ban is permanent because it's not a right to use any of our platforms, and there are responsibilities attached to renting our vehicles. So we work in close collaboration with TfL, the boroughs, together as operators as well, to make sure our users are aware of that, and where they do behave badly, as any service provider, you have a small number of users that might want to misuse or use in a way that's not appropriate. When that does happen, we're able to use our technology to crack down on it really effectively.
Just to echo the guys before, thank you so much for having us here today. It's great to have an in-person. So I'm just going to spend a few minutes talking about engagement. So the role that all of us as operators and TfL have been playing in making sure that we are engaging with the right people throughout this e-scooter trial. So all three operators in London, alongside TfL, were committed to engaging with a wide variety of stakeholders and disability groups to not only understand concerns, but also actively make changes to our services and operations in order to deliver the most accessible and inclusive service possible. So from the outset, that has involved proactively engaging and attending local, pan-London and national forums. And we've also held in-person meetings and sort of demos to let people come and physically see and feel the vehicles, and also demonstrate some of the technology we've been talking about firsthand and some of those features. So those reflective ID plates, which we've actually designed with sight loss councils, and ensure those features actually do provide the accessibility and protect public safety. As operators as well, I know we all have our own safety boards. So for TIER, we have a UK safety board, and that comprises of senior independent experts in road safety, accessibility, and sight loss. And TPT and London Vision actually feature on our safety board. The boards meet regularly, and they essentially scrutinise all of our approaches to safety and make sure we're running the most responsible operations. And they also stress test policies and features and explore the best safety practice possible in the industry across every sector. And then we also advocate for new industry-wide safety features to mitigate the risks that e-scooters can pose, including AVAS, which I will come on to shortly because I know there's interest in that in particular. So accessibility inclusion also does stretch to our riders themselves, so not just the non-riders. So a key main aim of the e-scooter trial in London is to understand how we can all collectively lower barriers to access and deliver an inclusive and safe service for everyone. So we all, I think we've touched on this before, but we all have compulsory in-app training exercises. And we also offer in-person training for people who may have never ridden an e-scooter. So we've partnered with an organisation called Bikeworks. So they run cycle safety training sessions across London. They're well known across local communities. We've designed an e-scooter training session with them in person, and we're rolling out more sessions this summer to essentially give people an opportunity to try one in a safe environment with trained cycle instructors. And yeah, they can have a go before sort of going out on the road using any of our sort of e-scooter services. I'll quickly touch on AVAS. So that is the acoustic vehicle alert system. That, a key success actually is the consistent collaboration that we've seen across operators and with TfL. And I think this is a really great shining example of that. So we've all sort of signed up to a joint ambition of developing and trialing a universal sound that could help improve safety across the entire e-scooter industry. We're really pleased to be partnering with UCL's specialist facility. So Pearl is the Person Environment Activity Research Lab. A bit of a mouthful, but alongside DOT, Lime and TfL, they will be researching and developing a universal sound for rental e-scooters. That is a joint initiative. It is an industry first, and it follows extensive engagement with disability experts, including TfL's own IDAG, Transport for All, TPT, and the Royal National Institute of Blind People. The research is also building on existing work by all three operators that we've all done to date, including DOT's recent work with the University of Salford. And it will be, ultimately, the research will be developing a sound that will be ethically tested in Hull's world-leading facility. It's an incredible site if you haven't been there or heard of it. Essentially, it can recreate different city environments, and we will also be testing the sound on street in London to ensure the sound works for individuals in real-world settings and takes into account the different needs of individuals, such as those with sight loss, hearing loss, and neurodiverse conditions. The research is underway now, which is very exciting, and we are really committed to keeping stakeholders up to date on progress. So we are expecting testing in Pearl and on street to take place this summer. And we're hopeful that the adoption of the sound, subject to the extension of the e-scooter trial through to November. And we are incredibly keen, us and UCL, for sight loss councils to be involved in the on-street testing phase. And we will certainly be having an opportunity to invite people to participate once we are at that stage. We're just not quite there yet, but we will certainly be in touch about that. And just to add, so the universality of this sound is key and a huge benefit to the research that we're undertaking. So we will be providing that sound for free to the benefit of other operators in our industry, in the e-scooter industry, and the residents of the cities in which we all serve. So I just wanted to reiterate, it is complex work, this project. It's really important that we get the sound right, that we test it, it is inclusive and doesn't have any adverse effects to the urban environment. And also that it has longevity and that is a sustainable solution to sort of address the issues that I know are a real concern for people. But I do appreciate it might be taking a little bit longer than people would like, but we just want to ensure we get it right and we deliver a solution that we can all ultimately benefit from. So that was everything I was going to add on that. I don't know if we've got a break now or if I'm handing over to you. Perfect. Yeah.
Just before I hand over to Steve to talk about sort of enforcement of the illegal vehicles, I just wanted to just go on to next steps for the trial and what we anticipate over the next few months. So the Department for Transport has allowed trials in the UK to run up until the end of November. Our trial in London currently ends in June, which would be 12 months, but there is provision for an extension of up to 6 months. Any future policy decision on e-scooters is with the Department for Transport, but we will be using the findings from the trial to constantly feed back to the DFT to try and influence this and to help influence this. And yeah, we really hope that it will be able to contribute to the future policy around. So after Steve, you'll be invited to questions, but I do need to say that we are currently in the pre-election period, so there might be some bits of information we can't share, but if there is anything, we can share it afterwards. That's also, like I mentioned at the beginning, when we get to it, would really welcome any feedback or experiences you've had with the rental vehicles and questions. But before we do that, I'll hand over to Steve to talk about enforcement of illegal vehicles.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Sergeant Steve Wilson from the Metropolitan Police, the Road Transport Policing Command. And I am now the country's expert on e-scooters. So certainly with regards to policing. So the enforcement activity of e-scooters has been an ever-evolving step since they started to appear on the streets in 2008. And they came to the forefront in 2019 when the UK suffered its first fatality. So in the Met, we adopted a process called Hornet, which is a graduated response to the appearance of e-scooters on London's roads and the UK's roads. It's a very fancy way of saying we started out gradually building up our enforcement activity. At the beginning, a lot of education. If you didn't know what to term these devices on a specific organisation's website, you couldn't find the information. The DFT calls them power transporters. We call them e-scooters. Other people call them micromobility. And if you weren't on the right website using the right terminology, you couldn't find the information. So at the beginning, we were about collating that information and making sure everybody was singing off the same hymn sheet, getting that information out to the public via the press, the media. You saw a lot of newspaper articles, interviews and papers. As time went by, we then moved to increase and include enforcement activity on that, up to now where we see high levels of enforcement activity. So when it comes to enforcement activity, what does that mean? Well, it means that they're motor vehicles. They're not insured. They don't have licenses. And I am obviously talking about private scooters. Rental scooters do have all of those things that's been explained before. So in 2019, the MPS seized 53 e-scooters, issued hundreds of warnings to people telling them that they were not compliant with the law, and if they continued to ride them, they would have them seized. Now, when I say seizing them, they will have also have received a ticket, either no insurance, which is a £300 fine and 6 points on their driving licence, or not in accordance, which is a £100 fine and 3 points on their licence. So it has real world ramifications if you're trying to drive, perhaps you drive for a living, real impact, real immediate impact as well. As we moved into 2020, we started that hybrid approach of education and enforcement. Those levels of seizures went up to 284. So 5 times as much enforcement. And then as we entered 2021, obviously we were in a lockdown situation. A lot of the roads were empty. A lot of these devices were appearing on the roads. They were riding them on roads that are empty, therefore deemed to be safer. But by that, their riding was becoming more reckless and dangerous. So our enforcement increased significantly. In 2021, we seized 3,987 scooters. So every single one of those would have received a ticket. We do have to balance our enforcement proportionally with the amount of risk that's on the road. Obviously, the fatal 4 are the causes of road deaths. So we focus a lot of our attention on that, but we can do that in conjunction with this. We did 1 week of targeted activity when the trial launched to make sure that people knew that when the trial was launched, it wasn't an excuse to go and get those scooters back out of garages and lockups and start riding them. And in 1 week alone, we seized 507 scooters. That is an unsustainable method. We couldn't do that all the time. We have to have the storage for these. We have to comply with the legislation that's around storage and how long we keep them. And we physically wouldn't be able to store 500 a week in our storage facilities. But we do continue to do enforcement. And obviously there are peaks and troughs in the amount of enforcement based on the weather, which massively impacts the willingness of the rider to ride these devices. Certainly when it comes to the private design, they don't have many of the safety features that the rental scooters do, often operating on very small wheels with very poor quality batteries and braking systems, and some wouldn't really call standing on the back wheel a braking system, but they are still operating in that method. And we see that drop off in the winter months or when the weather is particularly wet, but in the summer, again, that enforcement level goes up. Our focus obviously around road safety and making sure that the people using the road, all of the people using the road are able to do so in a safe manner, which is why you see the additions and changes to the highway code, which do come from RTPC having input in that and introducing the hierarchy of road user. Some people do ask me, where does the e-scooter sit in that hierarchy? For me, it's a little bit over a cyclist, but before a car. You know, they are a mechanically propelled vehicle. They are riding them in spaces where pedestrians could be and cyclists definitely will be. So they sit alongside cycles, somewhere between cycles and cars. But they don't have a category. They're not in there at the moment because it's still a trial. Moving forward, perhaps if they are adopted, they will sit more definitely. As I said, I am the national expert at the moment, which means I do liaise with the county forces that experience this, albeit on a smaller scale and with less resources than what we have in the MP. To try and make sure that the approach is consistent across the country. No matter where you be, you should see a fairly similar approach. That work has also then led to my work with PACS, the Parliamentary Advisory Council for Transport Safety, where I sat alongside an expert, and they've just compiled a research paper which you can find, and I will forward a link to you through the council meeting for that if you'd like to review the information in that. And we found a lot of information, and a lot of that information that made its way into that report is a function of the learning we learned from the rental scooters. Recommendations in that include speed limits, or if private use is going to be legalized, they need to find a way to limit the speed of those devices, and using the 12.5 mile an hour limit that we set in London is a great benchmark. It has a secondary benefit in that we see large numbers of head injuries in those that are injured while riding scooters. Therefore, the use of a cycle helmet should become mandatory, or recommendation is that it becomes mandatory. And the reason for that is they're rated also at 12.5 miles an hour. Again, making clear that this whole document is a holistic document and not free to take individual parts out of it that they agree with. It has been fully researched and studied to make sure it makes sense as a whole document. There's a wide variety in there. We do include things like audible sensors need to be considered, they need to be required, and it's all what we're learning through the trials. And that's why the trials have been a opportunity to learn. There are places places and people that will say that the UK is very slow to adopt this form of transport. And what I say to them is it's better to get it right than to get it fast. And what we've seen is them move all across Europe, become popular everywhere. They've come to London where we've put lots of restrictions and lots of learning in place, and now seen that learning and that understanding flow backwards across Europe. And you have seen things like go slow zones being adopted in Paris, speed limits being looked at. There's still learning to be done in this environment, and that's the important thing to do, is make sure that learning is focused on safety, and that what we learn is also shared not just in the UK but with our colleagues in the European police forces and environments. So there is still more to be learned. There's still a lot more to be done. When the DFT is considering stuff like this, they do have my contact details. They do reach out to me to find out my opinion. It's not just policing opinion. I have an understanding of engineering and how these devices work, and all three of the operators in London have given the time of their own engineering team so that I can fully understand what it is that I'm being asked to do. On more than one occasion, they've given me access to their teams. So I've been very appreciative of that collaborative working. TfL, I sit on all of the meetings they've mentioned that they all go to. I also sit there with them, able to feedback what we're doing in enforcement and make sure that everybody knows what everybody is doing. So no one is acting in isolation.